So I'm just going to start us off here and kind of do a quick intro, just for those of you who don't know the organization or are joining us for the first time, and then we'll get started with you, Ed. So you can sit back for a second.
Okay.
Relax a little bit. But yeah, for everyone who has joined, what I want to do is just start off by kind of giving you a quick introduction of Kua Ventures, who we are, what we do, and then kind of launch into sort of the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish here today. And then at the end, what we'll do is we'll have a time where we can ask, kind of do some Q&As to kind of get anyone's specific questions. So I encourage you to put them in the chat box, add any questions that you might have for Ed, for myself, but also feel free to introduce yourself, you know, your name, your organization, as well. So it'd be good to get to know you. But so to give you a little bit of a background about Kua Ventures and who we are. So our vision is to become an affordable source of capital, coaching, and community for early stage, faith-driven social enterprises, starting in East Africa and then going beyond. For the past 37 years, we've been providing capital and coaching primarily to micro and small businesses in the emerging markets all around the world. And our ultimate goal is growing local businesses that have a vision of community impact. And so as we look to create quality jobs for hardworking men and women, to enable them to support their families and transform their communities. And so that's kind of what we're looking for, and kind of why we exist, and why the founder of our organization kind of got started 37 years ago. So for today's kind of webinar, what we're hoping to accomplish is that we're going to launch kind of a series of sort of topical business lessons from leaders inside our community to drive knowledge sharing, but also engagement across our network of entrepreneurs and professionals. And so what we're trying to do is we're hoping to be able to provide that kind of that access and a platform where leaders can share their stories, share their learnings, kind of mistakes they're making, opportunities they see, but inside our portfolio of entrepreneurs, but then also kind of the greater community here in Kenya, across East Africa as well. And so why we're kind of some context into today's conversation, and kind of why we've invited Ed to kind of share with us, is we're constantly reviewing business plans and engaging with entrepreneurs who are approaching us, and they're trying to close the gap between the capital that they have and the capital that they need to grow their business. And so we're trying to provide financing that it's aligned to their individual business model, and trying to help founders make informed decisions of how and when to leverage different types of capital to meet the needs for their growing business. And so with that kind of some context of kind of like our organization, but also the conversations that we are constantly having, I thought it would just be helpful to invite Ed Stucky, a close friend of mine and an advisor and a member of our investment committee, to join and share some of his learning. So Ed's, bit of context into Ed's background. So Ed is the president, CEO of Republic Capital Access. And he's going to kind of share some insights from his experience and his perspective on some of the pros and cons of different types of financing and how this could affect a small business in their growth plans. And so Ed's kind of got a very long, kind of distinguished career. Not trying to make you too old there, Ed, but he's got a much longer career than mine. Let's say.
Too late for that.
He's got a long, distinguished career in government in the United States, but also in business, public affairs, spanning over the last 40 years. And in 2009, he started Republic Capital Access, which is now the largest and fastest growing commercial financing company exclusively for government contractors, both large and small in the United States, which a significant portion is small businesses. He's also served in the Reagan administration, at the U.S. Customs Service, Treasury Department, and the White House. And so we're not going to focus on that today, Ed, but maybe I need to learn a little bit more about what it's like to work in the White House. But and he holds a degree in business administration from the University of Kansas, and he's served on numerous nonprofit boards. So let's kind of just launch in. And again, so anyone feel free to, I'll be monitoring the chat box, but ask any questions kind of as we go along, and we'll either might jump in as we go, or we might leave them to the end, but feel free to ask any question you find is relevant. So Ed, So to launch in, so you have you financed over 1,200 US government contractors, and most of them are small. But before we kind of get into the different merits of the different types of capital, the pros and cons, et cetera, can you give us kind of an overview of from your position, from your business, what do you look for before extending a term sheet?
Sure. Happy to do that. But before getting into that, first of all, thanks for inviting me on this, Peter. I really appreciate it. And what you all are doing in that part of the world is just fantastic. So it's wonderful in all fronts. As Peter said, we finance government contractors. We started in 2009 to finance lots of companies and lots of contracts in that time. Our type of financing is fairly unique, but I think probably some of the broader brush strokes and how we look at customers before we finance them would be useful. We are very relationship oriented. In the small business world, that's important. Larger companies are probably more about the numbers of the transaction, but that's not the world we operate in, and probably not the world that, Peter, you're going to operate in either. So we kind of believe one of our mantras is that extraordinary people achieve extraordinary results. So we're looking for management teams. That's the most important thing, even more so than numbers. The management team is a group that is comfortable hiring people smarter than they are. And as everybody says they are, but it's surprising how rare that is. Is it a group that keeps their word? That's really the most important thing that is out there before we finance a company. We're looking at that. And do they kind of, this is one of our philosophies, but do they sort of look at things as, here today, here tomorrow? Everybody has a 5-year plan. And certainly people want some liquidity event, as it's called. But the fact is, if you run your business right today and you're planning to be here tomorrow, all of that takes care of itself. So we do get a little nervous if somebody comes in and says, the next year I'm going to do this and that and sell the business and make a bunch of money. Often they end up not focusing on what needs to be done today. So that's kind of sort of the overall approach before we finance somebody. Sure. And then it kind of breaks down into really sort of 3 areas that we look at. Does the company have a product that's useful? So that's talking to customers. And so we're looking at, are you providing a product or a service, in our case, that the government actually needs? And there's a lot of research, a lot of data available, I should say, where we can determine whether or not that is a product a customer wants. The second thing we do want to, I don't want to dismiss the fact that the numbers are important. We do want to know that the numbers are real. Sometimes that can involve an auditor, but not often. Most of our companies don't have audited financials. Yeah. But we delve into the numbers to make sure that they make sense. If there's something that jumps out that doesn't seem to make sense, we ask questions to make sure we understand it. And then the last one, and this gets back to the most important, is the management capable of executing. And that goes back to kind of the integrity of the management. Have they dealt with problems in the past? If there is a problem, are they going to admit it and deal with it? It's a character issue. And the only way to solve, or the only way to get an assessment of that, is to really spend time with the management. So that's kind of what we look at before we invest in a business to get to the next phase of trying to structure a transaction. And it's kind of a version of strong management, good market, and a possible task to do. So those are kind of the high level things.
Okay. And so, and it seems like people management team, which is that seems to be a very kind of key part of what you're looking at, and how you're kind of, before you kind of get into the transaction and finding an agreement between your business and theirs, the people seems to be a key point.
I would say that's 75–80% of it is that. If you don't have the good management, the product doesn't really matter. The service doesn't really matter. If you have good management, other things do matter. But the truth is, our experience with, and so if you look at the 1,200 companies we've financed, they really run the gamut from startups winning their first contract to larger companies that have stubbed their toe a bit, and so they can't get a bank line. Most all of our customers are not eligible for a traditional commercial bank line in the States. That's why we step in and provide financing. But on startups, our experience is rarely do they achieve even 50% of what their projections are. Entrepreneurs are very optimistic. And in fact, when I started this business, it took us several years to hit our projections. So you're looking for, when that doesn't happen, what are you going to do then? And that gets back to management more than anything else.
Okay. Yeah, true. Okay. Do you have those conversations with, as you're kind of going through the business and you're looking at the forecasts, do you have kind of very kind of direct, open conversations about kind of assessing that with the entrepreneurs? And so you're seeing how they react to you challenging the forecasts as well?
Very direct. Yeah. I mean, if we feel that someone is not being honest, and a lot of our companies come to us because they may have stubbed their toe. As I said, they made a mistake or they took on too much debt or something happened, they lost a contract. And one of the red flags for us is if that management team blames that on someone else.
Mm,
If they step up and say, look, I missed this, I made a mistake, and here's what I'm doing about it. That's great because there will be other mistakes that get made. So it really is our questions to get to the character. Everyone talks about character, but get to the character of the management team. So yeah, we have very frank discussions with them. And
sure.
sometimes, I mean, it's rare. It's very rare we haven't been able to finance someone, but occasionally you run into this just isn't a good fit. And you
Mm-hmm.
guys are probably going to be happier elsewhere.
Okay. Okay. So part of those conversations is just exactly seeing how people kind of react to your questions and kind of to that kind of due diligence process. And for you, seeing people owning what they're good at, maybe some of the weak points as well, or gaps or mistakes that have been made. That's something that for you is really important, is of some people being very honest. Because I think, and is that trying to like you said before, like the entrepreneur's optimism
Mhm.
versus more the reality. And so just trying to discern that, because you want obviously a business that has that conviction of like, this is going to change the world, right?
Yeah. That it's going to change the world, although sometimes that can be a little bit disconcerting as well.
Mhm.
Often business is simple stuff. It's one foot in front of the other. It's not the companies that are going to change the world. There's certainly plenty of them, and there's certainly plenty that have. But a lot of times it's I can provide this product or service better than my competitor can.
Mm,
And so when the business plan gets a little too grandiose,
yeah,
that's also a red flag because often, first of all, you're not going to achieve it, but also it kind of means you may not be paying attention to the day to day. And the day to day is what it's all about.
sure, sure.
But to your
What?
point, in terms of mistakes, you're absolutely correct. And in fact, you certainly learn more from how someone recovers from a mistake than you do for someone who has never had that mistake to deal with. If it's just been
Yeah.
nothing but success in a rising market, everybody makes money. What's really
Mm,
interesting is when things hit a wall, how does somebody perform?
sure. Yeah. 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 Good point. Okay. And maybe we'll come back to a little bit about that later on, just some of those aspects. I think of, and then even in our context here in Kenya, of course, there's sort of important parts to consider as well. But maybe let's jump into kind of the financing side to it. Um, and trying to keep it kind of at a bit of a high level, right? Because there's different markets have different complexities, and trying to localize as well. But there seems to be like an endless kind of variety of different types of capital, right? And I think that's something that we are really kind of, as we're looking at new businesses and even existing businesses in the portfolio, which trying to kind of really understand how to tailor capital to the needs of the different business cycles, the different type of business, manufacturing to service business. Can you talk a little bit about just sort of the main categories of business, right? I mean, because you've been in this industry for so long. And so you can
Sure.
sort of touch on the main categories and we'll start kind of breaking in the ins and outs.
Sure. I mean, we're kind of simple people, so we try and keep it simple, but we look at the world as there's two types of financing, there's debt and there's equity. And everything
Mm-hmm.
else is kind of a digression from those two. So there's a bunch of different products that kind of cross over, but the bottom line is there's equity, you don't have to pay back, there's debt, you do have to pay back.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how we look at the world. The equity side of it, as everyone knows, I think is certainly more expensive in that you're giving up a piece of your company. On the other hand, it's less risky because you don't have to pay it back. So if
Mm.
things don't go well, it's not as if someone is going to take collateral that you may have pledged in order to get debt financing. The debt side of it, you got to pay it back, and there's penalties for not paying it back, and those penalties could be fairly mild to just restructuring the debt, or pretty severe. You could lose actually everything you own, not just your
Mm-hmm.
business, but also personal assets. So that is a much riskier thing. If you look at why companies fail, the most common reason is they have too much debt and can't pay it back, and therefore they fail. So
Okay.
we always caution people. In fact, our product is not debt. What we are, not to go too far down this road because it's fairly unique, it probably doesn't apply in the circumstances that you're looking at, but we're actually purchasing assets off of a company's balance sheet. Generally, those are receivables. Sometimes they're a
Okay.
little bit different. So we purchase those at a discount, so there's a cost to it, but there's no recourse back to the company. So there's no
Okay.
obligation to repay us. So we're
Mm,
going to be kind of like equity, but we don't take ownership of the business, but we're going to be a little bit more expensive than debt, but pretty close to that. Anyway, not to go down that path. So those are the two types. And the debt side of it is the one where people need to be the most careful, not just to take too much debt that you can't then repay for some reason, particularly if
mm,
things don't go well. But the other
mhm.
side of it is there's a lot of companies out there, certainly in the US, I suspect also there, that can be, I don't want to say misleading. I don't know the people, so I don't want to cast aspersions, but are very clever about how they market. So
Okay.
for instance, if you go to a bank and you get a loan at 6% annual interest, pretty reasonable loan nowadays. It's a little bit greater than prime in the US, and that
Mhm.
is paying 6% over the course of a year.
Mhm.
There are companies out there that will offer you products at 2%, but that
Okay.
may be 2% a month. So you have to multiply by 12, the effective interest rate is 24%. So you got
Mm,
to be very careful. We do run into this. We have companies that say, well, I'm only paying 2% for my money. And it's like, well, yeah, you're paying 24% because those receivables turn every month. So you
okay.
got to be very careful about mapping out what the actual cost associated with that is.
Mm,
On the debt side, one of the other common sort of pitches is that you will only pay in, back up one second. If you borrow money, generally you're paying that off over a period of time. You're paying interest and part of the principal you're paying each month. So like a home
sure.
loan, paying down the principal. Um, some of these debt funds will offer you loans at interest only. You don't pay down the principal. And
Okay.
so your monthly payment is small, but you're not reducing the principal. And so when
Mhm.
that comes due in a year, 2 years, 3 years, you owe that principal in full. Hugely risky because you're going to have to refinance at the end of that time. So we always tell people, look, you want to pay that debt off as quickly as you possibly can and make sure that it is what's called fully amortizing over whatever that period is. Don't get yourself into a situation of just paying interest because you're going to end up with a big payment due at the end of that term. So there's a
Mhm.
whole bunch of those things that you just got to watch out for. And each one is slightly different, but the best thing to do is to model out what the true cost of that debt is. And that's something
Mhm.
else that you guys can help people do.
Yeah.
Model out what the true cost of that debt is, make sure you can pay it back, and then assume that your revenues drop by 30–40%. Can you still pay it back?
Mhm.
Because that will frequently happen. So the debt piece of it is the most affordable, but it's the most dangerous piece for a company to take, particularly early on in that company's life cycle, because it can cause you to lose everything. The equity side of it, it's rare that that's going to happen.
Mm,
Business may fail, but you're not going to lose your home and other personal assets.
sure. Yeah. 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 Okay. But yeah. So one question here, I'm just reading in the things. One is just trying to kind of understand a little bit of, let's say, the industries that Republic Capital Access are funding, just to kind of sort of understand kind of where the types of businesses, where they falling in, just from your experience. Would you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, can you repeat that one more time? Make sure I got it correctly.
Yeah, just what type of industries, let's say the businesses that you're funding, like, so they're government contractors, kind of, so
Mhm.
that's kind of their businesses that are exclusively serving the US government. But what kind of industries do they range from?
Sure. So most of them are going to be service industries. So the
Okay.
best way to think of them is they're providing staffing to the US government. So they're versions of staffing industries. And that
Okay.
staffing may be pretty basic security guard services all the way to cyber software developers. So it's
Mm-hmm.
really a broad range. The next piece behind that would be companies that are selling product to the government.
Okay.
So think of a company that needs to sell $3 or $4 million worth of product to the government. They need to buy that product from someone. we'll provide the financing to purchase that product. We'll then fund the receivable, and then generally we pay both our customer and also the provider of that product. But if you look at our portfolio, I'm going to say 80% of it are service providers and 20% are product providers.
Okay.
We don't do much on the manufacturing side.
Sure.
When the government, most of the contracts the government has that relate to manufacturing with large, think of Lockheed and Northrop, big companies. And so our financing is not something that would appeal to them.
Okay, that's helpful. So just to kind of recap, can you just from the, you touched on kind of some of the kind of the main, let's say, different types of financing. And of course, it's kind of bit on there's kind of lots of different sort of mini sub buckets inside of that. But can you kind of dive a little bit deeper into some of the pros and cons of sort of, or even sort of as businesses have approached you and they have in their mind, they're thinking through, okay, I want this type of capital and this is what I need. Just sort of how you've sort of helped them kind of understand the pros and cons for them as they're looking to grow their business.
Sure. There's really no magic bullet. I mean, we do spend a lot of time getting to know companies, and we're very quick, if we're not the right solution, to refer them to somebody who is a better solution.
Yeah.
Which is fortunate that we don't, I mean, we're of a size and kind of our investor group, we don't have to chase revenue. But it really is, I guess the best advice I would give, and this is also where you guys could really play a role, the best advice I would give is before someone pulls the trigger, make sure, and this is just in growing your business, make sure you have 3 or 4 kind of trusted advisors that you can talk to about this that may not necessarily have any kind of vested interest in directing you one way or another.
Sure.
Because each one is kind of bespoke in terms of what the company needs at that particular point, and there's not one size fits all. So accounting firms, law firms, and also just people who've been there. I mean, what we have seen, the most successful businesses are those who have assembled a group. You call it advisory committee, what do you want to call it? It could be formal or informal. But a group of people who've grown businesses in a similar industry who sort of want to give back, and you can pick their brain. Companies that have done that well and use that are the ones that, with what we see, that do the best job, whether it's financing or anything else. Bounce ideas off of people, say, what do you think? Do you have a better idea? Do you know someone I should be talking to? So a lot of it is just simply soliciting the opinion of others who have been there before. Which didn't answer your question, but if I had to tell, because each one's sort of different, but if I had to tell an entrepreneur, what's the first thing, one of the first things you can do in that group of advisors who've been there before and use them and bounce ideas off of them. It doesn't mean that they're going to give you the advice that's best for you, because their business was a bit different. But that ability to go to them is enormously important.
Yeah. Do you find that people will pay for that? Like in your context, do you find that, like, obviously it's very valuable insight that, like, to pay for someone to be able to provide you that independent insight into what your business needs best, but also not your financer.
Now, that's a great question, by the way. And this is more interesting talking about finance anyway, so we may be digressing, but nevertheless, it's probably helpful. On startups, what we have found on new businesses, young businesses, there is always a group of people who will do that for free, pro bono, because they just want to help. As a business gets more mature, those advisors may want to get paid something. But we always tell people, and we see this a lot in our space, companies getting started, and there's a bunch of different folks out there that will help them, get registered in the government system and all these sorts of things, and charge people, $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 to do it. We always tell people, be a little leery of that. You want people who are doing it for the right reasons, which means people who want you to grow and succeed and not looking to get paid for it. And again, that may not apply in the part of the world where you are, but we have found that, and certainly I have found, that you can find advisors who will help you and give you advice because they care about you succeeding versus getting paid. As a company gets bigger, that's different. And in certain areas like legal, for instance, that not only do you need to pay for, but you should pay for. I mean, that's a different kind of transaction. But that kind of group of advisors, probably don't need to pay for them. And if somebody wants to get paid for it, they may not be the right advisor for early stage companies.
Okay. Yeah. So going to one of the questions here. So at what point, kind of in relation to one's profit and loss or balance sheets, do you consider debt as a very expensive option? Like, is that like when you're looking at it?
Sure. I think that the expense, certainly the interest that you pay on your debt, the fees and interest that you pay on your debt can be expensive. And you need to understand what those are and not kind of be tricked into thinking they're less than they are, but that you can model out. I think where debt becomes really expensive is when you take debt on the balance sheet, and if something goes wrong, you can't pay it back. Because as I said, that's when you end up losing your business. You could end up losing your home, you could end up losing other assets. So there's price and cost. And price, of course, is what you pay. Cost is what you may pay if things don't go well. So I think to take debt on your balance sheet, you need to look at your revenue, you need to look at your profitability, and then you need to adjust that and say, okay, if revenue disappears for some reason, am I going to be able to pay this back? What you don't want to be in a position is where you default on debt, because then it does get very expensive.
Yeah. Okay. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the kind of the difference between the cost and the price? Because even here in this context, I think there's a lot of people, even as they're approaching kind of commercial banks, and there's the interest rate that's published, and then there's all the kind of additional fees that are added on top of that, and so it's also exactly as you align it to your business model. So can you kind of just expand a little bit of how you see that?
Sure, I'll give you an example kind of in our world. So our pricing is going to be a little bit more than a commercial bank, but well below what's called a factoring company or other forms of debt.
Okay.
We're pretty cost effective, but a little bit more than a commercial bank. We just don't have access to the cheap deposits in the Federal Reserve that a bank has. So we have to price up a little bit. But if the company, for some reason, if you have an owner that may be taking a lot of money out of the business and maybe investing in other things on the side, or even a lifestyle issue, if they default on a bank line, that gets to be, well, the bank is less expensive, so the price is lower. The cost of defaulting on a bank line is a lot. I mean, the bank's going to charge you additional penalties and fees, and they may try and foreclose on your business. They may try and take assets. So when we're talking to people, we say our price is a little higher, but our cost, if things don't go well, would be a lot lower, because we don't do that. So the cost piece of it is, how difficult is this going to be? How restrictive, or what are called covenants in a bank, which are the rules associated with a bank loan. Those can get very costly if you violate those. So you need to kind of balance. That's what I mean by the cost side of it. The cost can be a lot if things don't go the way you plan. So we do have customers that actually pay a little bit more for us because the owners want to. They may be supporting another business with the profits of this. They may be, like I said, it could be a lifestyle issue. We're simple, it's very easy to use us. We're easier than a bank line. So the price and the cost are two different things. The price is what you pay. The cost is what you may pay if things don't go well. Or at least that's what we the price and the cost.
Interesting. So I'm thinking even here in Kenya, I'm also thinking even the accessibility of financing. I think we're constantly talking to businesses that are spending, months, even years plus trying to actually, find investors and find obviously different types than more the commercial bank side, but even the cost and energy that you put into fundraising versus actually growing your business as well. So it's kind of another kind of example of the cost it has on the business, even though the price might be higher, but the cost on the management, the team, and the founders of actually going to try and access capital, right?
It's a great point, by the way. And so again, relating it to our world, before you win a government contract, you have to show the government that you have the financial, what they call capability to execute. And so we're not looking at historical financials. We're really looking at that asset we're going to purchase, which is, think of it as receivable. So it's very easy for us. Someone may have a $2 million credit facility with us, and they need to raise that to 10 million because they're going to win a big contract. We'll provide the letter that they submit, and then in 24 hours notice, we can increase that line with no questions asked. So that's a very easy thing to do. So you're kind of looking at a business that if they had to go to their bank and get that line or to outside investors would take an enormous amount of time. Whereas they know that we will be there and we can increase it with literally a phone call.
Okay.
So we have a number of companies of ours that maybe they weren't bankable initially, but they have become bankable, but they stay with us because of that ease. And we always tell people, we'll take care of the issue of you worrying about making payroll so you can run your business. If you're worried about making payroll, you're not running your business. So that's the other side of the financing. So when you're looking at financial partners, and we tell people this all the time, it's a little self-serving, but not always. You certainly, this is back to price and cost. You certainly want to make sure that you understand the price associated with it, but you also want to make sure you have the right partner and the right investor that can help you grow the business and isn't going to wear you out with the financial side of it or raising additional capital. You want someone that will support you in that growth so that you don't have to spend your time worrying about where the money's coming from. You can worry about your business.
Okay. Yeah. So even like just identifying that in some ways that's another cost that people might not consider because they're very price sensitive, but it's finding an institution or a financier that can actually grow with you as well, just to reduce that cost on the organization.
Right. We have one outside investor. It's a group out of Little Rock it's a family office named Stevens, and they've been around since the 30s and, very successful family. And they provided some of the initial capital to get going in terms of equity to get the business started. But the nice thing about they're not the group that will give you the highest valuation for your business because it's one person's money. It's not an outside fund. But having said that, they are the group that will continuously fund your business if there's an issue. And that to us, in addition to the personal relationship, that to us is far more valuable. In fact, anecdotally, I love anecdotes, but when we were getting started, we were redoing our bank line and we decrease it. And I wasn't sure we'd be able to close because it's a bank line. There's a lot of work associated with that. Close in time to buy another big chunk of receivables. So on a Tuesday afternoon, I called Warren Stevens, the guy's head of his family, and said we may need a little bridge capital while we wait to close because we thought we were going to close on Thursday. But if we didn't, we were going to be short of cash. And he said, absolutely no problem. And on Thursday, in a phone call on Thursday afternoon, he wired another $5 million to our account. It was there Wednesday morning.
No,
that's invaluable, absolutely invaluable.
Yeah.
So when you're looking for partners, make sure it kind of goes back to, actually, I hadn't thought about this before, but it's sort of the reverse what we talked about at the beginning. Well, we look at the character, we look at does the manager keep their word? What's their character like? All of that stuff. The same applies going the other direction. When you're going to be taking money from somebody for any reason, debt or equity, it doesn't matter. Make sure you research who you're taking it from. What is their track record like? I am always amazed. We offer up references. People almost never call, which is stunning to me. But get references, get to know who you're taking the money from. Price matters, but that gets to cost. If you take it from the wrong person, the cost could be enormous. So really do that the other way, and don't be embarrassed to ask that question. If you're asking questions about references, and you're asking the same questions we do to kind of get to the root of someone's character, if for some reason they're not willing to share that, that tells you a lot. So make sure you do your due diligence on who you're taking the money from as well, would probably be the other side of that advice.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's definitely, I think here it's probably a little different, you know what I mean? I mean, because access to capital is a little bit more scarce. And so I think when people see an offer, they see a term sheet, in some ways you can get very excited, right? Because it's like, okay, I've got an inroad, I've got an access. And so it's like, where do I compromise? But like what you're saying is that the costs actually could be extremely high. And so it's just really kind of to pause, take a moment and really consider, is this the right capital? Is this the right financer and their track record? And is that right for really kind of the business that you are the kind of the steward of? It's a great point.
And isn't the right kind? There's a product here in the US. I doubt that it exists. I don't know. They're called title loans, and it's actually a loan for an automobile. And that industry will loan you $1,500 and you put up your $5,000 automobile.
Yeah.
And they actually loan you, I shouldn't say they all do this, but it's not unusual for them to loan you more than you can pay back. Because what they want is your collateral.
Yeah,
So you got to be really careful when you're getting into that sort of a situation, that you really understand what it is that you're doing, and certainly don't ever give up collateral more than that is greater than the value of that loan. But there are people out there who prey on folks, and that
sure.
one in particular is pretty objectionable because they're really
Sure,
looking
yeah.
hard
So,
on.
so here in Nairobi, actually, it's extremely common. So they're called logbook loans. And so, like when I'm driving my kid to school, that's probably the advertising I see the most, is people handing out flyers and offering that. I haven't personally made those phone calls yet, but it's probably the exact same, like you're saying. So something to be.
Sadly, we may have exported that to you all. I apologize.
Yeah. So to kind of go down sort of a little bit of kind of from your perspective as a financer, just talking through kind of pitches and how sometimes they can be misleading. Can you talk a little bit about kind of common kind of pitches of where what makes you wary kind of as a financer, and just, or even just different things that kind of kind of put you on the back foot? Can you expand
Sure.
on that a little bit?
So, well, first of all, there's a lot of stuff. It's probably there too, but I probably get 15 emails a day from people offering to give you money. If somebody's offering to provide financing with very little due diligence on their part, and they're willing to close very quickly, that's generally a red flag, because it's often going to be, there's not going to be any sort of relationship if you're taking the money from. You're one of a million customers. They don't really care about you. They want to get the loan booked, and they're going to charge you a pretty high fee for that sort of speed and lack of due diligence. So if you're funding your business that way, that is a pretty risky proposition to do. So that's kind of the flag number one. The second is, going back to what I said before, if in doing your due diligence with your lender or whoever's providing the equity, if they are reluctant to share even the mistakes they've made, I mean, that's gonna be a great question to ask them. Where have you made an error? What wouldn't you do again? If they're reluctant to do that, or if they somehow act like they have not made a mistake, then that's obviously a red flag. So, those are kind of the things to watch out for, and then really model what the true cost is. Because a lot of as I said before, a lot of the funding, it may look like it's fairly affordable, but it ends up being pretty pricey. If you look at it as an annual interest rate, an annual percentage rate, is what we call it. So those are kind of the main things to watch out for. But the biggest one, at least in the States, and again, I don't know if it applies there, but the area where you have the most, sometimes just dodgy, sometimes outright fraud, are on generally internet driven, will close quickly, no questions asked. Someone who's willing to give you money without asking questions is probably not somebody who you want in your business. So be very leery of those sorts of quick loan closures. And it's very seductive, because what they're looking at is, we'll do a whole bunch of these, a bunch of them will fail. We don't really care. When things get difficult, they're not going to work with you. Again, I don't know the legal structure there. The legal structure here in the US is often those allow for kind of an uncontested foreclosure on the business or whatever asset pledged. And then the other two, by the way, getting into that, read the fine print. Every one of these will involve documentation, and read the fine print and understand it. I'm always amazed how many people, even with us, don't really read our loan documents that closely. Read the fine print. Doesn't hurt to get somebody who understands this. It could be a lawyer, doesn't have to be, to look at and point out very specific things that could end up costing you your business. But all of it kind of comes back to, if things are going well, it doesn't matter. If there's a bump in the road, what happens then? And those are really the questions to ask. How are you going to be treated by whoever the lender is? Are you going to be able to pay it back? What happens if you don't pay it back? What sort of recourse do they have? All those sorts of things. Worry about the downside. If things go well, it don't matter.
Yeah, I remember once when we were sitting down for coffee, actually, and you were talking me through a situation that you were having. I think as you were applying for financing or something, and like at the very last gate, like in like a 60-page plus legal document, and the other financer had like changed a page or changed a few terms without telling you, but your team caught it.
Yeah,
And I
you
was
did.
amazed of like just the importance of trusting the people on the other side, and actually what you sign at that last day, but what people could have done to manipulate that document in order to kind of get you to sign something else. And so it's just, I guess that's kind of like what you're saying is just really, as you're choosing your financing, also choosing your investors as well.
No, totally. And, we've even seen circumstances where, customers have signed a loan agreement. So customers may borrow money from someone else and then come to us.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, well, here's what you signed. Well, yeah, but the company we signed it with said we don't ever enforce that, so don't worry about it. If it's
Yeah.
written down,
Yeah.
it can be enforced.
Yeah.
So, the folks selling those products are often pretty loose about, because they get compensated to close a sale.
Yeah.
So they really focus on that side of it. But read the fine print, understand the fine print, ask the questions.
Mm-hmm.
Don't get in too much of a hurry. I know, and that's hard to do, particularly if you're really scrambling to get financing together. You need it to make payroll, then you get in a hurry. But it's far better to, as they say, measure twice and cut once than it is to really rush into something and then pay a bigger price down the road.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Very important. So we're coming up to time now in a bit of it. So maybe, does anyone else have any additional questions? I'm trying to follow the chat at the same time. So any additional questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. Ed, any final thoughts on your side, and then I'll get ready to close us off on sort of one other point I want to share.
So I will tell you, in terms of mistakes, when I started the business, because I worked in government, and then I was a consultant for a while, had not started a business. I started the business and went to this friend of mine, Warren Stevens, very successful family, multi-billionaire, for the capital to get going, and had a business plan, thought I knew what I was doing. And he looked at it, he said, okay, we'll invest, but it's going to take you twice as long to get profitable and cost you twice as much money. And of course, being the entrepreneur, and he's a very dear friend, I said, oh, you're wrong. I got this figured out. We had to totally change our business plan almost to the day and the dollar. It took twice as long, cost twice as much money. And I will never forget going back to see him and saying, we're going to run out of money soon. I need more.
Yeah.
He laughed. He did not say, I told you so. He could have.
Yeah.
So, everybody makes those mistakes. Bill Gates early on at Microsoft couldn't make payroll. You're going to have those sorts of problems. Do not think you're the only one, that everyone succeeded. No one else had these issues. This kind of gets back to having the right advisors. People have been there. Everybody's had these problems. So be honest about it, deal with them, and don't let it affect kind of your confidence when you run into those issues, because that will destroy your business, and not to mention your health. Everybody's got this stuff, and everybody's had it. We had it too. And fortunately now we're of a size where we don't have those issues anymore, but don't let that get in the way of your confidence, would be the only other thing I would say. And that, by the way, that's a great pitch on you guys, Peter. You guys are really good at that. I mean, you guys are very, very, very good trusted advisors, in addition to being a financing source. So, I would just encourage those people in the call that you need that. And one of them to consider is Peter and his group.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the soft plug. One of the questions is, are we offering financing? And so, yeah, so Kua Ventures, we are offering financing. So we have, kind of twice a year, we have a call for applications. And so, but on our website, www.kuaventures.org, you'll see an application form, and feel free to kind of upload your business plan and some of the questions about kind of what you're looking for. But so let me kind of close us off here. And so one thing I wanted to kind of loop around, and I'll follow up with everyone who registered. I'll send an email out with this, but one of the kind of tools that we find very helpful. So because I'm guessing if you're on this call, you're a business, you're a founder, you're looking to grow your business, or you're looking for funding. So we hope this time together was helpful and offered you some kind of good insights and kind of roadmarks for you to look out for and consider. But one thing I wanted to leave you with is just, it's very kind of on point out of a lot of what you're sharing, but sort of like a self-evaluation checklist. And so it's just an incredible book I've been reading called Adventure Finance. And so, but it's very much so about kind of innovative finance in the kind of emerging markets, because, a lot of like VC private equity investors are very much so looking for asset light, tech enabled exponential growth focused companies, kind of the ones you said you're very cautious of, Ed. But
Mhm.
and a lot of SMEs in this market don't necessarily tick all of those boxes, even if they try to portray that. Yet a lot of commercial banks in the market are very risk adverse. They want a very strong credit history. They've got quite rigid regulatory requirements that they need to fulfill, and also they need to collateralize their loans as well. And so a lot of startups and small business early stage just don't kind of fit those boxes. So there's a lot of kind of other kind of more innovative financing that is become available. But I think the main kind of principle we wanted to kind of share today is just sort of really to kind of think through what type of funding is best for you, and what is available as you try to kind of launch into fundraising and enter into that stage for your business. And so I'll send through the checklist, but one is like when you're looking at your business, just considering your business, take a step back, get a piece of paper. How do you make money? Who are your customers? What are your growth projections? Just making sure you kind of invest time in sort of having the answers to all of those questions and really sort of mapping out your plan in the future. And kind of going to Ed's points is being realistic, being thoughtful, considering successful seasons and considering downturns and potential challenges, but really sort of mapping out what does the business look like to then inform kind of what financing that you need. But the other one is then when things are, I'm actually mapping out from a business perspective, what are your funding needs? Like how much money do you need? What exactly are you planning on spending it on? But also then considering how are you going to pay it back, right? And so really kind of considering out how and when that the business will be able to pay it back, because if you don't consider that, then you could get the wrong type of financing that could really hinder and destroy the business. But then the other point onto what kind of Ed's alluded to, and this is kind of more on kind of from when you think of even from KUA's perspective, but also a lot of the other capital that's in this market here in Kenya, is also how involved do you want your funders to be, right? There's a lot of different types of funders and they have different expectations. And so Ed was talking about researching who they are and how they'll treat you. But it's a very important part of it. It's like, how involved do you want them to be? So it's something very important to consider. And so that to inform what type of funder is right for you. Because if you're going to invest your time on coffee meetings and networking and preparing business plans and valuations, you need to really kind of know what is the exact type of funder that you want, so you can be very strategic on actually pursuing that. And then it's, if you want them to be more involved, it's what type of resources can they provide, but also what kind of return do they expect and when do they expect it? Because otherwise there's going to be this huge mismatch from the funding that you need for your business and the funding that investor is going to provide. So I'll share the kind of a checklist, but just as a kind of a pointer for any business that's kind of entering into this kind of fundraising season for their business, is just to sort of to take this and kind of go through with their leadership or with their board, or as Ed said, some advisors, because that could be a really kind of important and helpful exercise to really be smart and strategic of actually as you go looking for funding. And so, yeah. But Ed, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Appreciate you kind of sharing your experience and your insight. And for everyone on the call, thanks for joining. If you have any questions, please follow up on email, check out our website. And we will plan to kind of have these kind of more regularly moving forward. So keep an eye out for an email for sometime later next month. And so, yeah.
Thank you very much. Good luck, everybody.
And thanks for joining.
Thanks.